Hey, how's everyone doing? In this video we're going to be going over a quick demo of basically how to get started with MobX, what it is, how it works, and we're going to build a complete app in about 25 minutes. It's going to be pretty simple, but it should give you a good introduction of how to get up and running. So for those who don't know what MobX is, it's, I would say, an alternative to, well, first of all, it's to store and manage the state of your React app in this case we're going to be talking about. And I guess you would say that it's in competition with, or it does the same thing as Redux, or just simply using set state inside React components. So what we're going to do to get started is we're going to build a new Create React app. So we'll type Create React app, and we're going to be doing something called we'll call the bird cage. We're just going to build an app that we can enter some birds into our store and display them. Something nice and simple. So once we go through setting up React, we'll just let this thing finish. Likes to take his time. Somehow there's 19,000 dependencies. Great. So we've got our Create React app set up, so we'll go into the birdcage folder and we'll pop open Atom. So at this point we've got our typical Create React app boilerplate. So we can start this thing by telling it to yarn start, pop open the website, and we'll see that we have a simple Create React app going on. Perfect. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is something that you don't always need to when you're just building a small app, but we want to eject from Create React app. So we'll talk about what that is and then why. So if you look at your dependencies in your package.json file, you'll see that we've got one of them being React scripts. This sort of gives you everything to do with all the Webpack configuration, Babel, all of the different scripts to build your code and to start your server and all of that stuff. And we're going to basically eject from that, and I'll show you what happens when you do that. So we're going to run this eject command here. So we'll stop our server and we'll run eject. Yep, we do. Cool. So if you come back and look at this exact same package.json file, you'll see that now we have a whole bunch of different dependencies. Babel, ESLint, we got some Webpack stuff down here, and our scripts look a little bit different. Over here you'll see that we've got a config folder with all of our Webpack config, and that's basically it. By ejecting, it brings in all of the dependencies so that we've got a bit more control over them. So why would we want to do that? The reason for this is because with MobX we want to be able to use something called Decorators. And Decorators, if you haven't seen them before, you basically can put something like this, an @ symbol with the name of the decorator in front of your function. And what that does is it decorates, or it wraps your function with additional functionality. So it sort of puts your function inside of another one so that it can do different things sort of before or after calling your actual code. And this makes working with MobX a lot easier. So to do that, we're going to install a Babel plugin, and I always forget the name of it because it's super long. I'll copy that and then talk about it. So we'll come down here and we're going to add this just as a regular dependency. So we're going to say yarn add, paste that in, and it's Babel plugin transform decorators legacy. It's called legacy, but the truth is that it's quite new, and it's not part of normal JavaScript yet, so we want to bring that in. We're going to add that. Shouldn't take too long. Great. And now I'm going to copy something else. Now that we have that plugin installed, we can come and look for the sometimes there's a file here called .babelrc, but in this case it's right here in the package.json. We're going to go down to the Babel section of it, and we're going to add a new one called plugins. We'll do an array of them, and we'll just paste this in. Transform Decorators Legacy. So by doing those two, by installing that plugin and then adding this Transform Decorators Legacy plugin, we can now use decorators. And as we'll see later, it will make working with MobX a lot easier. So we're done that step. Moving on, we want to install MobX itself. So we'll do another yarn add, and we're going to install MobX React. And maybe we'll also add MobX. Just add them both in there so that we know we've got access to the main MobX, but also MobX React. I don't know if this is entirely necessary because I think it comes with MobX React, but we'll do it for good measure. So if you come up, you'll see that we've got MobX and React in here now. So now we can start working with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start up our React app. Same command, yarn run start or yarn start. And we're going to wait till this loads. And then we're going to start adding MobX to our React app. We'll close package.json, it's not needed anymore. So what we're going to be doing is working in the source folder. And the first thing we'll do, and what I like to do, is to create a new folder where we're going to put our stores. So the one difference between Redux and MobX is that in Redux you stick with one, I would say, massive store that can be broken into being handled by different reducers. But in MobX you can have different stores where they sort of each specialize in handling the state for one piece of the application. It's up to you to divide it up how you think fits best, but for this demo we're just going to create one store. So what we're going to do is we're going to new file, and we'll just call this the bird store since we're making an app about birds.js. So the first thing we're going to want to do is import some dependencies into our store. So we are going to import three things: observable, action, and computed. And these will all come from MobX themselves. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to build a class, and we'll call our class the bird store. And it doesn't need to extend any other classes. It's just a straight up class. And what we'll do is we're going to fill in this class with the details needed to run our store. Sometimes what I like to do is just get the export out of the way first. And we're going to do this a little bit different. You might be tempted to export the class itself like this, where you could have even written export default class bird store up here. But we're not going to do that here. And I'll talk about why in a sec. What we're going to do is we'll create a variable called store, and we will create a new bird store instance. And then we will export the instance of our store. So export default store. The reason we're doing this is because across our entire application, we don't want many copies of the same store. We want a single bird store. So by exporting the instance of it, we know that whoever imports it into other files will be dealing with the one instance of the bird store, the same data across the entire application. So our bird store is going to be made up of three things, the three things we imported up here: observable, action, and computed. So we'll talk about what observable is, and we're going to be using the decorator that we set up in a previous step. So we're going to say observable, and we'll just say birds equals empty array. So basically, anything that's observable, these are the properties or the data that you want to keep track of. So in this case, we've got a property called birds, and it's going to be initialized to an empty array. Next, and there can be multiple of these, depending which different properties you need to keep track of. The next thing we're going to work with is an action. An action is essentially a function where you change the value of the property you're observing. So we will create an action, and it's going to be called, we'll just call it add bird, and it's going to be equal to an arrow function that accepts a bird. So then what we're going to do inside of this add bird function, we are going to take our bird and push it onto the birds array. So we do that by saying this.birds.push, and we'll push that bird on. And that's it. So one difference between MobX and Redux is that there's no sort of two places, actions and reducers, where the action returns or dispatches a piece of data that gets handled by the reducer, which updates the state. None of that. We've just got a function here that can directly interact with our property above. Also, it doesn't need to be immutable. Under the scenes, I believe it is immutable. When we say that this property is observable, it sort of wraps our array with a special type of array that I think keeps track of the different changes you make to it. But we don't really need to worry ourselves about that. We can just treat it like a normal array, mutate it by pushing on a new bird to it. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to use a computed property. So we'll say computed, and I believe we actually say computed get, and we will say that we want this to give us the bird count. So it's a function. Hopefully I didn't write this wrong. If I did, it will give me an error and I'll fix it later. And what this computed function is going to do is it's going to return basically how many birds we have in the array. So this.birds.size. So what is a computed function? Basically, it's whenever we want to sort of working with our data up here, our birds observable property, we want to maybe filter it or do some sort of calculation based on it. Maybe you've got a shopping cart and you want to count up what's the total cost of it. Anytime you want to access the data and perform some sort of calculation on it, and you want this to be reflected in real time with the component that's displaying it. I like to sort of think about this as if we go into Google Drive and create a new spreadsheet. So think about each cell like the data that we're observing. So we'll put 5 in this one and 10 in this one. And in this third cell here, C, we're going to say that we want it to be a sum of A1 plus B1. Great, so we got 15 here. And anytime the underlying value changes, it instantly is reflected in this third cell that's observing or reacting to the changes. So that's sort of what a computed property is like. So now that we've got our store, we've imported the ability to have observable properties, keep track of the data in our store, actions which modify the data, and computed which sort of can perform calculations or filter it in some way. We're good to start using it. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go into the index file, and in Create React App, this is sort of the entry point, and it's where we take our app component and we render it inside of the root DOM node. And what we're going to do is we're going to import something called provider, which comes from MobX React. And I'll talk about what provider is in a sec. What we're going to do is we're just going to say, we'll create a variable called root, and in here we will have our provider, which wraps our app. And this will probably be familiar if you've been working with Redux. It's got the idea of a provider as well. So now we're not going to render our app, but we're going to render this root that we just created above. We're not done yet. What we're going to do is we are going to first import our store. So we'll import the bird store from stores bird store, and then we will pass it as a prop to the provider. So bird store equals bird store. So by doing this, by wrapping the provider around our app, we have access to any of the stores that we have up here in the provider. So it gives our components, and it doesn't just need to be direct children like app, it can be children of app, children of children, but it allows us to access our store in a nice and easy way. So if we do that, if we come back here, told you I screwed it up. So computed, let me just come back and look at my demo that I built earlier. My apologies. Computed, so you can't do the equals like you did for the action here. I'll fix it, and then maybe something to watch out when you're building your own. So you get rid of the arrow function. There you go. And the highlighting fixed itself, so you're probably screaming at me the whole time that I screwed it up, but it's nice to see my mistakes. So we got a computed get bird count, which returns the size of the birds, how many are in the array. We load it now, our app is working again. Great. So we're actually done in this index file here. And what we're going to do is move into the app component. I'm just going to clean this up a bit. We don't need an SVG or some CSS. And I'm going to rip out all of this HTML here. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to build a simple form that allows us to enter birds, birds, and we'll add them to our array of birds in the store, and we'll display them below and along with a count of how many birds we have. So what we're going to do first is import two things from MobX React. So the things we're going to import are inject and observer from MobX React. And we'll talk about what those are in a sec. So above our class, we're going to use our decorators again to decorate our class with these two pieces of functionality. So we're going to say that we want to inject into this app the bird store. And it's no coincidence that it looks the same as what we have over here in the provider. This is the reason why we can inject the bird store into our app here. And then below we're going to say that this component is an observer. And what that does, it basically watches our store for when the data changes to force it to re-render our component. So now that we have that, it's blank now because I deleted things, but we're good to go. Before we even get in here, if we inspect and look at our React DevTools, try to make this a little bigger. Cool. So if we go look, we've got our provider, which has the bird store. And then you'll see that we've got a component that we didn't create. This was created with the decorator inject. So we're injecting app with our bird store. If we go in here, we've got the app. If we look over to the right, you can see that we're passing the bird store as a prop into our app. So that's not something sort of we did ourselves. That's done when we injected this app with the bird store. So the way it injects it is it passes your store as a prop. So given that it's a prop, I'm going to extract it or take it out of the props for easier access. So we'll say the bird store equals this.props. So that would be the same as saying bird store equals this.props.bird store, but it's a new ES6 way of accessing data from an object. So now that we have our bird store, we can start using it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an H2, and we're going to say you have some number of birds. as our h2. So here we can embed our bird store dot, and we can use our computed bird count. Oh, bird count. Awesome. And you'll notice that I don't use parentheses here, and that's because it's a get, an accessor. You can treat it like as if it were a property of the bird store. So if we load it, we have no birds in our bird store, so you would expect it to say you have 0 birds. And it doesn't. So we got to figure out why. Maybe I'm wrong. Nope, not wrong. It returns the birds dot length. There we go. Sorry, too much. Been doing Ruby during the day, so I got messed up there. So now we have 0 birds in our bird store. It's not size, it's length. Moving on. We've got our h2 that accesses our computed property. And next thing we need to do is we need a form to be able to get some birds into our bird store. So we'll create a form. We'll just get rid of this action here. We'll come back to that in a sec. And what we're going to do is inside of here we'll have an input, and it will be typed text. Maybe we'll put a placeholder, enter bird, and we need to basically give a way to reference it later on in a function. So we're going to add a ref property which takes an input. Well, it basically takes the element from here, whatever element it is, but I like to match this here. So it takes the input and we'll put it into a class level property. We'll call it this dot, we'll just say bird is equal to the input. Great. So we load it. We've got our enter bird here. And then we're just going to put a button. Add bird. Great. Looking great. What a beautiful application we're building. So when you add a bird and you submit this, we need a way to handle the form submission. So to do that, we will add an onSubmit action handler here. And what we'll do is we'll take the event and we'll just pass it to a new function we're going to create called handle submission. Or handle submit. That's going to take the E. So let's come up here and we need to create this function that we've called. So we will say handle submit is an arrow function that receives an E. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prevent the default of this event. So given that the event is a form submission, we're basically going to stop the form from submitting. Then what we can do is we need to access the value of this input down here. So the way we do that is we use the reference to it that we set up. So what we will do, and as a little demo, I haven't tried this, so hopefully it works, but if we come and we find our input, or we'll do our app, we come into the console here. I believe you can type $R, yep, to access the component that you've highlighted. And if we access the bird, what you're going to see is that we now have a reference to this input here. So then we could get the value of it. In this case it's blank, but if we do chicken, we can now see that we have chicken here. So that's one way to sort of use this console to help you with your development. So what we'll do is we'll put that value into a variable. So we'll just say bird is this dot bird dot value. And now that we have this value, we want to add it to our store. So we can't use this bird store reference here because it's in a different function. So for this case, let's just access it directly. This.props.birdStore, and then we want to call the action. So if you recall here, we created our add_bird action, which receives the bird. So we'll say the birdStore.addBird, and we'll pass the bird to it. Next, just so that you can continue adding other birds, we're going to set the value back to, we'll just do an empty string here, so that you can enter the next bird. Alright, so let's come here and let's enter chicken. Oh, you can see we have one bird now in our bird store. And if we look for our app, we access the props. Here we can look at the details of our bird store. So we've got our add_bird function, birds. So that's the property that we're observing. Notice its type isn't a normal array, it's an observable array. So that's when we wrap that @observer, or @observable, I believe it is. Yeah, @observable around our birds property. It converted it to an observable array where the first value in here is chicken, the thing we just entered. So it seems to be working well so far. It cleared out our form. So the next thing we want to do is display the birds in our bird store. We'll just display them in a simple UL. And in here, we are going to embed a value. And the thing we're going to embed is we're going to map the birds in our bird store. So we'll just say birdstore.birds.map. And as we map it, each of them we'll just call a bird that goes to an arrow function. And if I actually switch it up to parentheses, I don't even need to do the return. So now inside of here, we're going to create an li for each of the birds we're mapping. And in our li, we will just simply output our bird. Now anytime you map an array in React, it complains unless you add a key property here. So we could just use the name of the bird. Alternatively, you could put parentheses here and work with the index of each of the birds we're mapping, but in this case we'll just use the bird itself as the key. Doesn't really matter here. So just to recap this, we've got a UL where inside we want to create an li for each of the birds in our bird store. So to do that, we embed with these curlies here, bird store, and we access our birds observable property. And we're going to map each of the values. And as we're mapping them, we're going to take the bird, which is just a string, the name of the bird, and we're going to produce an li for each of them. We're going to map from a string to the li. The li has a key, which is just the value of the bird, and inside the li we put the bird in here. So if we come back here, we can add a chicken, we can add a parakeet, no clue if you spelled that right, a blue jay, etc. And it's our computed property is ticking up correctly. Our form is adding the birds to our bird store in the birds property. And then we're showing them in the UL below, mapping all of the values of our store. So here pretty easily we went in however long that was, 20-25 minutes, from nothing to create React app. We installed the Babel legacy transform decorators plugin, which was, where is it? Plugin transform decorators legacy. We added our Babel plugin. Given that, we could install MobX and create our store, which has observable properties, actions which mutate the observable properties, and computed functions or getters that perform calculations or filtering on the data that you're observing. And then we exported an instance of this store. We went to our index file and we wrapped our main component here with the provider. Now, if you're using a React Router or something like that, you can just put the provider around your React Router. And then what we did is we added a prop of the store that we just created in the other file. What that gave us is the ability to come to our component, and using inject an observer, we were able to inject the bird store into our component as a prop, and then we were able to say that it is an observer, which allows it to react or re-render to the changes to the observable or computed properties. We came into our render function and we grabbed the reference to the bird store. First thing we did in our H2 here was to use the computed property to say how many birds we have. We created a form which allows the user to enter a bird and deal with the form submission. What that did was prevent the default form submission event, grabbed the value of the input and passed it to our action of the bird store, then reset the form. Then we came down here and we mapped all of the values, all of our birds, and produced a list of them here. And that was the intro to MobX, going from zero to a working MobX app in about 25 minutes. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you are having a fantastic day. Take care.